Howdy folks. Have you ever wondered what's the ultimate way to capture POV footage? Maybe you've tried yourself and things just don't look right. Maybe you've seen some of my videos and you're wondering, how do I get that look? Well, in today's video, I'm going to break it all down for you. And I'm going to show you everything from where to mount the camera, what camera to use, and even how to post-process it. Let's get started. So as I've been growing this channel over the past multiple years, I've tested out multiple different setups, multiple different cameras, and I've really settled on what's the best for me right now. And it starts with one of these. If you've ever seen this, this is the GoPro Max. This is my current cam of choice. I chose this camera because it's a pretty high quality 360 camera. And if you don't know what a 360 camera is, it basically means there's a lens on either side of the camera. So it can see in every direction all around itself. Now for mountain biking, you don't really need to see all around yourself, you just need to see forward. But the problem with a lot of action cameras out these days, even the newer ones, is that they have a certain field of view that they're kind of locked into. And it's not as wide as you might want in some cases. So having a 360 camera like this adds some flexibility. And there is a huge perk to this that I'll talk about in the post-processing phase that might blow your mind if you haven't thought about trying this before. Ideally, it's as close to our eyes as possible so that it's seeing pretty much what we see. But obviously we don't want a camera right in our face. So my next best bet is either right here on the forehead or on the chin. So I've ended up on the chin mount as the best place to mount the camera. And I'll show you exactly how I do that here. So this is the final setup right here. Pretty straightforward. Obviously you have to have a full face helmet if you're gonna do the chin mount. You gotta have somewhere to mount it, of course. And the reason why I think the chin mount is the ultimate way to go is because you can see the handlebars really well, but it's not too low that you can't see the trail over the handlebars. So that's kind of the main problem with using like a chest mount or something. A lot of people use a chest mount. Mounting the camera up here, which you could do on like a half shell, is also a decent option, but sometimes it's kind of finicky to fit a camera in there. And I also think having that higher POV angle isn't quite as good as having it a bit lower as you have on the chin mount. So this is pretty straightforward to mount here. It's just a couple of zip ties and a standard GoPro clip. And I can adjust the angle of it, obviously, with this right here. And the cool thing about the 360 camera is that I don't really have to worry if it's exactly level or at the right spot, because I can reframe the footage later. And so again, we'll talk about that here in the post-processing. Honestly, the post-processing part of this was the thing I had the most difficulty figuring out, and I really want to make that easy for you guys. One downside of having a GoPro like this or any 360 camera is that you have to manipulate the footage later on. You can't just drop it in your editor and go necessarily. So I have a really simple workaround for that though. Again, we'll talk about all that here in a moment. So I've landed on the GoPro Max, even though it's a couple years old and isn't, the highest resolution, mainly because it's just got a nice color to it. It's got a nice flat profile that I can record in and color grade later. And it's a little bit cheaper used than some of these newer 360 cameras that are out. And the form factor is nice as well. The other popular ones out are the Insta360 X3 and the X4, cameras like that. And they do have a very nice image, and I can actually do a review video comparing the two if you guys would like. But I don't like that it's long and skinny, and it's not really any smaller than this camera or any lighter. And I've just gotten used to how this GoPro works, and it's kind of like if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing. But yeah, I strongly recommend the GoPro Max. It's done great for me so far, and it's a pretty tough camera too. It's definitely been through some stuff. Now there is also a couple companies out there that make an attachment that just like sticks on, and you can get specific ones for your helmet. I found that this is really easy though for most full face helmets, because a couple of zip ties and a GoPro clip that you probably already have is going to be way cheaper. So yeah, it's as simple as that, and that's really the camera I use and where I mount it. And as far as the settings on the GoPro, this is going to be almost as important, if not more important, than everything I just talked about. So let's dive into that next. So for the settings on the GoPro Max, I have it in 5.6K at 30 frames a second. I've got the shutter auto, and I actually have the EV comp at -1. On these GoPros, it's a little harder to pull back those highlights and retain detail than you can in some of the shadows. And I'd rather not clip the highlights as much as possible, so I do have it down -1. The white balance is on auto, and the ISO minimum is at 100 and the maximum is at 1600. I find I don't really need to adjust those at all. The sharpness is on low. Any digital sharpness that the camera's adding usually does not look good, in my opinion, so I leave that on low. And for the color, we have it on flat, of course, and this is only if you're going to be color grading later and you want a little bit more flexibility out of the image. As far as the audio, this is actually another critical part of it. The audio I'm currently getting isn't, the best ever, but it's really quick and easy for me. I don't have to mic myself up with an external mic. And so the best settings I found getting it straight out of the GoPro Max is using the 360 plus stereo option and turning wind on. If you guys have any questions on the settings in particular, please leave those in the comments. All right, so here we are in the computer, and we've got our 3 clips here that are my example clips I'm going to use from my GoPro Max. And you want the .360 files from them. That's going to be the main video file to work with. So the first thing I do is I need to convert these .360 clips into regular video files. So we'll go down here to GoPro Player and go up to File and Batch Exporter. And then I'll just go ahead and drag and drop these into Batch Exporter. Or you can click Add up here at the top. So over here on the right we have our settings for each of the clips, and at the top we've got resolution here at 5.6K. We want to go ahead and leave that. And then at codec I usually do ProRes and then ProRes LT, and this is going to be a very high quality export of these, and most people won't really need this. This is kind of overkill, but I like to retain as much quality as possible. I can do regular ProRes or some of these other options, but really they're just going to create absolutely massive file sizes. This LT already creates pretty big file sizes, so I'll just leave it at that. Then below that we've got the world lock and the horizon level. So I turned both of these off. Then we just want to click apply changes, and now they'll say all ready to go. So down here you can select where you want them to export to, and then we go ahead and click start. And these will start exporting. From this we'll get flat images instead of 360 images, and we'll be able to drop those right into our editor. Alright, the next step is to open your editing software, and for me I use DaVinci Resolve. So we'll go ahead and drag and drop our files in, and for this one I'm just going to use a couple of random ones from a different project, since I don't want to export the other ones. I already did that. So we'll just use these. They're the same. This is what you'll get, a .mov file. And then I go ahead and click change the project frame rate. We just want to make sure that the project is the same frame rate as the files that we're importing. I'll go ahead and take our sequence here and put it down on the timeline. And usually I would go through and chop these up, and I don't want to see the entire clip most of the time, but for the sake of this example, I'm not going to do any editing on them, of course. But my next step is to go ahead and drop in an adjustment layer. And this is kind of a roundabout way of doing it. I know some people like to do nodes on this program, and there's a few other options as well for applying effects to individual clips or multiple clips. But for me, an adjustment clip is just kind of a familiar way for me. So on this adjustment clip, I'm going to go ahead and add an effect. So I've installed a plugin called Carta VR. So there's a couple of really good videos online explaining how to install plugins on DaVinci, and in particular this Carta VR. So I can link those below. I'm not going to go in depth on that right now. So I use Carta VR here to manipulate the field of view that we're looking at. Which part of the image, of the 360 image, are we looking at? And in this case, you can just copy these settings if you want. But pretty much what each of these are going to do is change, like I said, where we're looking within this 360 bubble. So this is taking that 2D image here that we get exported from GoPro Player and manipulating it so that we get something that looks more like this. In this case, what I've done here is I've got it at 0.48. Sometimes I change this, but this is usually around where I set it. And you can see all this does is just zoom in and out on the image that we're looking at here. And then the pitch, like I was just playing around with, this is kind of up and down. I do have it angled down just a little bit so you can see the handlebars here. And then the yaw, of course, it's going to be side to side. And then the roll, Of course, if we need any correction in this way for the horizon, we can do it there. And then the rectilinear projection, I have it just on 0.5 here. And that's just going to kind of stretch things out and remove some of that fisheye effect. And then we have the tiny planet projection, which kind of does the opposite here. It's going to pull in the sides and going to give you that tiny planet effect, especially if you have this zoomed way out. You can see you start getting some crazy stuff. So yeah, this is really what I'm leaving it at right here. I don't use any of the tiny planet projection. The other thing I do with this adjustment clip is that I apply my color grade. So you can do a conversion from this GoPro log to Rec 709 or a standard color space, and that would be a pretty accurate way of doing it. For me, I like to do a little bit more of a stylized look, and we'll go over to the color tab here, and these are around about what I usually use. I like to pump up the contrast. We're going to add some shadows back and some highlights, make the image just a little bit more punchy. And with the mid detail, I like to bring that up quite a bit. It kind of just adds a little bit more depth to the image as well. The next thing I do is I bring up the shadows and I bring down the highlights a little bit. And this kind of gives me a bit of an HDR look. It's really easy to see the shadows and the highlights at the same time. Because when you're mountain biking, you're going to have a lot of varied lighting. And if this was just pure white and this was pure black over here in the shadows, then it would just not be quite as easy to see everything. So the next thing is saturation. I pump that up a little bit, and that's really about it as far as color grading. It's pretty straightforward, and it's more of just a color correction just to get the image looking normal again. But I like that nice saturated, punchy look. Now, this is my process for my long form content and any of my landscape videos. But for shorts and reels or any vertical content that I do, I have a little bit different of a process, and I'll show you that right now. So we'll go back to our raw clips here that we got straight out of the camera. These are the .360 files, so not the ones that you previously converted from GoPro Player already, but the original files from the camera. And I'll just go ahead and double click. I have this set to open up in GoPro Player here. And this is going to be where we reframe and scale for vertical. So as you can see here, GoPro Player allows you to reframe things. You can click the zoom in and out. But this is really why I think 360 cameras are the way to go. And that's because when I'm out filming, I want to only film once. But I want to have multiple products I can create with this video file. And obviously I want to make my long form content that's horizontal, but I also want to make reels and things like that that are vertical. But if we just go back to DaVinci here, so if we took some standard landscape footage and we wanted to make a reel out of it, we could go here to project settings and just switch it to vertical resolution. And then ta-da, we have some vertical footage. But the problem with this is that we're cropping in on our field of view quite a bit. And you can see, you can't even see my hands, can't really see much of the bike, and the trail is fine, but we just don't get much of a sense of speed or, kind of what's around us. It just feels too close. So the advantage to this is that we have all of the rest of the image here that we can play around with. So what I like to do is when you first open up GoPro Player, I just go ahead and come down here to this square and I turn off World Lock. I usually leave on horizon level, but that's your decision if you want to leave it horizon leveled or not. And then the next thing I do is just click this center button here, and then you can see it already has flipped to 9:16, but it'll usually just look like this. And I go ahead and set a keyframe right here at the very beginning, just by pressing right here on this center button. And then you can adjust the lens correction. As you can see, mine was already adjusted from previous settings. But I usually just pull that out a little bit, and then we can adjust the zoom here. I think we're a little too far zoomed out. So yeah, as you can see here, we have a nice vertical clip to use. And you can add another keyframe if you really wanted to, change wherever you're looking at, change how zoomed in you are. Really, you can do whatever, but I just set one at the beginning here, and then you're good to go for the whole clip. As you can see, it's just constantly facing forward where we need it to, and sometimes it takes a little tinkering with this first keyframe here to get it set right. Maybe as you watch the clip, it's looking too much up at the sky or looking too much down at the bike. just go back to the first keyframe, adjust it, set it, and then go ahead and play through and just see if it looks right. You can see here in the top, we can kind of see a little bit of my helmet, so we'll go back to the beginning and we'll pan down a little bit. I don't really want to see that very often, so something like this here looks a little better, and there we go. I'll go ahead and export this now, and these are my settings I use. Pretty straightforward. You could also do 4K if you wanted, and then I'll export this to a separate folder. Then I can throw that into my editor and make a little reel out of it if I have multiple clips, or I can just export that clip as is, and you're good to go. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is to it. I didn't want to make this video super long and lengthy, so there's some details I definitely didn't talk about, but I wanted to get straight to the point with you guys, and I don't want to waste any of your time. So yeah, if you like this video, please leave a comment, hit that like button, and subscribe as well. Anything helps to support my channel. So yeah, thank you as always for watching, and we'll see you next time. Peace.